Perhaps we'll start with panelists or roundtable participants giving their view of whatever, or particularly of what happens here and what are the ways of Cinemetrics, both the capital Cinemetrics capitalized and the uncapitalized, the way of approaching films by numbers, what they think of their future. So the mic is yours. We don't see anything on the screen, so do we need to?
No, you don't. Because I'll just note everything that we talk about in the next 9 minutes already. So, talking about the next, the tact, as we marked it yesterday. And we had the wish list, which is not something that is easy to follow, but I have specific questions for, are we, and this is the thing that we do in for IT, we have to communicate across borders, and it's usually hard. So that's why I want to ask these questions and record them for future reference. But Barry Salt said it's okay, so that's what I did. And okay, so frame accuracy versus time accuracy. Can we, could we please agree on time accuracy more than frame accuracy? Or is it, is it a big problem if we don't have frame accuracy?
You asked, I guess you must be out.
Go ahead. You
No, the bottom.
Yeah.
Come on. Oh, you have to press it twice. And hold it in. Yeah, okay. There, I'm on now. I hope you can hear me. I don't, as I said, I don't think what I was mentioning there, it matters that much. I wouldn't mind if you just went on leaving it as it is, whether the thing works to 1/10 of a second. I wouldn't mind that much, actually. But if you, because as I think I explained, it's the 1/10 of a second means when you're converting from truly frame accurate analyses that you you lose complete accuracy, and it goes to plus or minus, roughly speaking, plus or minus 1 second. You can work it out. As I started working it out, so that if you two frames rounds to 0.1 seconds, and 3 frames what's that round? It goes up and down. It doesn't round to an exact 1/10 of a second. But for most purposes, it doesn't matter. And in any case, the people who are particularly concerned about it, like me or James Cutting, have actually got it themselves, even if it doesn't end on the website as to frame accurate quite. It's near enough as far as I'm concerned, and possibly it's near enough for you as far as Cinemetrics is concerned. But what we do, it's a different matter.
Yeah, let me try to speak more broadly and cut into time.
Can I? No.
No, you can if you want to. Yeah,
I need to
get rid of the boring stuff. Okay.
Anyone else have any complaints about not having a frame exactly for it? Yeah,
I just think it should be clear what it is that you what has been counted, because.
Partly because I observe that people here are using Cinemetrics in all kinds of ways. If you're aggregating shot lengths, I agree with Barry. It's not a big deal. There's not enough to really throw things out. But if you're trying to discuss Veritov or the rhythm of a so it's just a matter of, because all kinds of people use the tool for all kinds of things. I think there needs to be a discussion. I think that would just be fine.
Discussion. Jordan has
on the site.
keep that one up over there.
One of the things that people have been asking for our database for is not just in film studies or in psychology, but also in computer graphics and computer science, where for them having a frame accurate situation to look for qualities of motion, different types of motion, they need that type of frame accuracy in order to do kind of the algorithmic approach that they're looking for. And I understand that's not the point of Cinemetrics, but I think it could be a very good kind of synergistic application where it would be great if people were able to use these for other things, and in turn that may also lead to more types of tools, automated tools for Cinemetrics. So I think that the frame accurate, I get that why it may be possibly more hassle than the source, but for certain populations not represented here, I think it could be rather important.
Should we take an open vote or?
No, it's not an open vote. I'm just.
Because there's another point. There's an important. I don't know whether it's on or off.
It is. It was on now.
It was on now. It's on. It's on now. In any case, there's another point because most of the Cinemetrics database, as it came up in someone's presentation just today or yesterday, is not accurate. When it's recorded with the ordinary tool, people have varying degrees of accuracy, and who did it?
Was Ian
Jones.
Ian, yeah. Compared. No, Charles had a comparison, didn't you?
Today I had a comparison.
Yeah, you had a comparison of of a frame accurate record and and another one, and you it's. They vary quite a bit. Of course, you're one of the good people. You're good at it, whereas other people are terrible at hitting the button at the point where the cut or a fixed interval after the cut has appeared, which is actually what we've got. Anyway, the point is that the data generated by the ordinary tool on the database, which is the vast bulk of it, actually, it's not worth using an accuracy of 0.1 second, 1/10 of a second, or a decisecond, if you like. So I think you want to take that into account too.
Yeah, I noticed that actually my finger cannot really react to to anything under 2
Let's keep it boring, please, because I need to finish.
Anyway, you've got the information.
Yeah. But my problem now is that the new tool will have milliseconds in it, and every millisecond, of course, is just one frame, and the skipping of frames from one to another is not timed as well as in frame accuracy, and the computer doesn't care, but some people might. So, but what I got from this, and I have 1 more minute before my alarm clock starts singing. Yes, for frame accuracy if possible. Yes, for time accuracy also. Yes. So if the tool that we want to get data from, we use time accuracy. The tool that is specific to looking at frames and cuts, we use frame accuracy. Now for the screenshots part, if we want to see visualize screenshots in our graphs, we had 2 good suggestions. Barry said usually the first frame is the best.
It's not the best, but it'll do.
It will do.
To identify this shot. It's all right. I'm not going to say anything.
Can I snooze it?
Yeah, snooze it for another minute.
No, it goes to 5.
So if you like, stop another speaker, then get rid of it.
All right. So yes, What we came up with for now is taking a screenshot. By default, it's the first frame, but you have an option of choosing your own if you don't agree.
That's perfect.
Yeah, I think that's the video.
And it's one screenshot per shot.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need studying movement within the shot.
Well, if you're getting to that point, you better rig it up yourself, I say.
All right.
Yeah.
Resolution of screenshots.
Give us options.
Well,
No. Don't make things too difficult for
Yeah.
yourself.
Storage, you have to store both.
they have to
Yeah.
store, you have to upload, going with this little, something like this, that you can look at.
A thumbnail.
Or
Something like this compared to what?
it's like,
This is the full size.
I'm not talking about aspect ratio, because we'll stick to 4:3, of course, by adding black stuff to that, because otherwise, if we worry about aspect ratio, then I have to worry about spacing on the page and stuff like that. And some people would say the width is the important thing that we have to represent, and some would say the height, and I have to stick with something. So 4:3 is fine,
Yeah.
and 320 by 200.
Yeah, I mean, I would think if you needed to get a higher quality image of a particular shot, again, you would just go get it.
You just go get it,
Yeah.
because you use this tool for just for getting
Yeah,
impressions of things.
yeah,
and
and when you
stuff.
gotta dig deeper, you dig deeper.
Mhm. Anything else for like specific technical stuff?
Well, there were requests of actually correcting data. You'll keep thinking about this.
Correcting data is, yes, it should be given to someone, but some or everyone. But you probably, we wouldn't want to give the option of correcting data to everyone.
Other than us, or every one of us.
I don't know.
Could you do registered users?
Well, yeah.
I don't want to register users.
Yeah.
Cause then it starts to exclude people.
Well, you make it very difficult yourself in that
Yeah.
case to do.
But look, if I want
No, it's not
to
difficult to do, but in my perception, it just scares off people.
Yeah, it goes against the websites.
Yeah, could we actually arrange a kind of a club of people who want to correct, and then
Yes.
they sign up, and then they're given this right to correct, and then if this is someone unknown, we don't give the right. If this is someone that contributes, we give them.
Well, we have the right to correct. I do have the right to correct, and Yuri has the right to correct, and Ian, who was talking yesterday, had the right to correct, which is there's lots of hidden stuff in the website. I shouldn't talk about this, but
No, I
yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm open to having a little club, since there's not many of us left, and I will. Okay, so in the webpage I can make a sign-up sheet for alpha, beta versions and stuff like that. And then you can sign up for testing, which is very helpful, but it's for the user it's difficult because you have to report to me, and you might lose your data that you've worked with the alpha version. With beta, less so, but still it's a possibility.
Okay, we'll arrange a club of experts that will be watching you making the new tool. That's what you're saying.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about adding fields for filmographic?
Yeah.
Filmographic information, I guess the archives have got some protocols here, at least for titles, things like that. Should we try and standardize, at least for new data coming in? And then people who want to can update with the correct title and, and if it's, a standardized format, like do you want the original language title first? That kind of stuff.
Define it and we will do it.
All right, that's
Okay.
a good point perhaps to shift from, if you have another question, you can do it quick.
Oh, well, I can't do it quickly, so let's.
Ben has that mic, so let's go right.
Well, I feel rather embarrassed here. I'm the interloper, and indeed I'm not quite sure why you were inviting me.
For that
except
exact
he's
reason,
a
I
friend of
remember
mine.
you're objecting to everything, so why not?
I mean, I've never contributed to the site. I've never used any data on the site, and indeed I don't think I've looked at the site for 2 years or more. When a long time ago I started counting shots, mostly under Barry's influence, and every film I went to I counted the shots. But after a bit I became aware of several things. First, that my counts were extremely unreliable. Secondly, I had no idea what I would do with the data I was accumulating with considerable labour. And so I simply stopped. And some of those worries still remained for me very much. I mean, I do worry about the data. Sometimes I'm told by people who know that certain kinds of errors don't matter because they cancel one another out. But it seems to me I don't have the statistical expertise to know when errors are ones that cancel themselves out or whether they're errors that accumulate. And that I felt was a problem. And I still some ways feel it is a problem, although obviously it's one that people are now addressing much more. But the principal reason I think I stopped is that I ceased to be very interested in shots in the way that they're, in some senses, the site is set up. I was more interested in films which had very few shots, and where in some senses the shot wasn't a terribly significant unit, or at least as far as I could see it wasn't, but I was much more interested in what happened in the shots. It's clear from the various papers here that the most obvious thing that Cinemetrics does, which is measure the lengths of shots and the distribution of those lengths of those shots, has been considerably expanded. That people are actually examining very many other properties of shots than simply their lengths. But the lengths still come in. I mean, you could see it in Charles's one here, that effectively what he's measuring is the lengths of the shots which contain certain other parameters than simply that they're shot number 250 or that there are a certain number of them. But it's still there as the shots. And I think that more or less implies that you've got to have a lot of them in the film for you to be able to get very much significant value out of it. I mean, a film with 100 shots is not likely to give you very much good information in terms of in terms of, as it were, an ASL calculation or indeed a calculation of certain features of it. I just still don't know what I would use a Cinemetrics calculation for. And the emphasis on shots has a further consequence, which is it does push you towards a certain corpuses of film. I mean, it's noticeable that Yuri and Daria are working on Griffith. Now, Griffith falls into the time period that I'm most interested in, but I regard him as a rather eccentric and atypical figure in that period. And I'm more interested in films which have very many fewer shots. And so I'm not sure whether there is a way. I mean, James is analysing things other than shots. For example, the stuff on clutter, which is based on a sampling of frames, basically, am I not right? And several of the other parameters you were considering, you were sampling frames. But still, when it came down to it, the analysis was an analysis of shots in films. And obviously there are other things that you can measure in films than shots and properties of shots, but I don't know how you would do it.
Right, and I have something to respond, but I think a good idea would be to listen to everyone and then keeping the questions to essential. It's on. It's on.
It's on. It's on. Well, I think you can probably hear me anyway. I hope. Yes, it is on. I agree with what Ben said. What you can get out of shot lengths are the easiest thing to quantify, and that's why people started there. And some people resist going beyond it. But then, you know, other things are important, and there's some basic things. First of all, this principle, my principle is that I try to analyze films in the first place in terms of the way they're put together, so that I'm working in terms of things that the makers will recognize, and they certainly recognize shots, and they to a certain extent recognize shot scale, how close their figures are to the camera, and so on, and those various other things. Now that's the first, the obvious line of attack to quantifying what aspects of film. And then after that, you try and expand into what might be useful directions. Well, actually, a fraction of a second. One of the things that I think is important for direction of expansion is into what hasn't been really tackled so far, and this is what I was talking about, or trying to talk about, is where the basic material, analysing the basic material, which is the scripts in the first place, and then even more difficult, what's going on dramatically, and relate that to shots and scale of shot and so on. Now, I think that's very important, but it's also very difficult. I've had to go at analysing plot structure and got a little way with a piece on Hitchcock's chase films. But anyway, the other way that could expand is in the direction that James Cutty concerned with, which is extremely important too, into other things which has been pointed out, beginning to approach what's going on within the frame, within the shot. But it's extremely difficult, so that to get something useful. So that, but nevertheless, you're doing it with the putting the filter on the shot to get the outline, rough outlines, and the treatment of clutter. Now, some people were wanting to discuss how many characters were in the shot. Now, this filter system doesn't actually identify the characters, but various people have been trying to do this, as at least you and I know, outline isolate figures and their movement and stuff, and you can get a certain way. So that's important too. And then the other thing is, which is James Cutty again, is the psychological connections. How audiences are really affected by these variables in film, as opposed to how people think they're affected, which is a long history, and it's still there. Of people assume that if you've got someone up close, it'll do something, it'll have more impact, or whatever it might be, or then you go to the Kuleshov experiment and things like that. Whether they actually work, although in fact everybody in the business, the filmmaking business, assumes they do. And people who write about films assume lots of these things do have an effect, a psychological effect. But it needs checking, I think. But this is, a vast area which needs working on, and it's quantitative. No, I was finished.
Let me comment on this idea of hard and easy. So as it turns out, cuts are very hard to detect. I mean, computer algorithms are pretty awful at it. There are international competitions in visual science about getting your best algorithm to detect a cut. And you know, the best ones in the world are about 95% correct. Well, that's not good enough for many of us. And they're even worse at detecting dissolves, for example. So you need a human, I think, you need a human observer to do that. Cut detection is hard. Once you have cuts, you can let the computer algorithm do intensity, you can have it do motion. That's trivial. I mean, you need somebody to program the thing, but that's something that a human doesn't have to do. And so the point here is that there's some things that are easy for computers to do, some things that are maybe a little tedious, but that humans can do best. And so an example I like to talk about in this context is to think about what a scene is. Well, people differ. Certainly the filmmaker has an idea what a scene is, may actually want to play with that concept, and then I find it useful to talk about subscenes as well, because sometimes in parallel action you go back and forth, and the units aren't really full scenes, they're what I would call subscenes. You're not going to get a computer to do that, so do it yourself. And okay, I don't trust myself to do that. You know, I'm not an authority on everyday vision. So what I did was get 3 people to do it. And then you just take the results that 2 out of 3 of the people did. And if there's no agreement at all, you're chasing butterflies. I mean, there's nothing there. If you get any agreement at all, there's likelihood that what they agree on is fairly important. So use people for that. And then once you have people having done that, then you can look, for example, at the quote scene boundaries or other kinds of stuff, and then you can run your algorithms on those data too. I mean, that's the easy part. The hard part is to get people to do it. But I think one of the things that excuse me, psychology might have to contribute is sort of how to deal with the psychological aspects of the data. I mean, you see, you know, I can't tell you how wonderful it is to see humanists interested in numbers. I promise you this doesn't normally happen. I mean, in my previous research life, I was interested in doing actually numerical analysis on impressionist images and how often they were published and things like that. No one in art was interested in that. Turns out some philosophers were, but that wasn't my target audience in the first place. So to find a native group that is interested in this is terrific. But there's a sense in which we're all experts. And one of the reasons why I am interested in studying popular films is that I can receive from authority. I'm not an expert on popular films, at least in watching them, but everyone else is. Certainly the undergraduates, for example, is the perfect audience for this. Let them decide what a scene is. Let them decide what, you know, characters are doing or whatever. And then you can do the analysis on that. Those analyses are fairly simple. Now you can reject any results that you've got there, but at least you have a kind of methodology. And the methodology is, you know, basically don't have just one person do this. Have multiple people do it, and you know, figure out who are the ones that you're going to choose from that. But get more data. A single set of data is not entirely helpful for some of the things we do.
Thank you, moderator. I'll probably just respond to what I think I have to. I have, in response to Ben, and then everyone and you, every one of you probably would be cross-examining each other and from the audiences. The immediate thought then was that, yes, I'm working in the same area more or less now using Cinemetrics as you, and I know that in the imperfect world of film history, we cannot afford to be too exacting. Otherwise, we forget that what we have is just a small percentage of what was there. One, of course, reason for choosing Griffith over less known and more normal filmmakers would be that basically every film that he made, and he made a lot, survived. Perhaps because he was so unlike others, perhaps for a number of reasons. So at least we have a corpus there. For others, you well know, we do not. Still, this does not discourage you to write an essay, another essay, and a book about early film history. You don't have everything. If you were striving to see everything, no book would be written, no essay would work, because this is being too exacting to the imperfect world. You wrote this classic essay on trafficking souls. Everyone quotes it, everyone reads it, and we all believe it. It's so well researched, so perfect. On the other hand, yes, and you're using ASL, and very usefully using ASL, showing that 7.2, which is exactly that we have on Cinemetrics as well, so you measured it exactly, tells a lot about this film compared to a lesser, to larger average shot length and other things. But you also deal with one or two, in fact, prints. Those are imperfect prints. Those are both are imperfect prints with shots perhaps missing, with scratched images. There are jumps and not jump cuts within the frame. We know that the film was better when it was new. Still, you're not discouraged, and you discover a lot. So what I'm thinking is that putting up with the imperfections of real life imperfections, of the material imperfections of the print doesn't stop us. Why should the imperfection of data that we are able to collect from this movie stop us? Approximation is there. You measured traffic soul, we measured traffic soul, we know that it's faster. We add this little fact and factors to the mix of things we're interested in. We're not putting this pyramid of a film or film history on the tip, on the top of a single ASL numbers, but it's not probably the reason to fear that numbers. So that would be my response to you, and then I would say, let's do whatever we want to. Respond to me, anyone who wants to say, I will give you a mic. Yep.
I set my alarm to finish my speech, and I had to snooze it, but alarm clocks are important in movies, I think. You can, I'm thinking alarm clock usually starts sounding in the previous frame, and then you jump. All alarm clocks do that. They wake you up. Right?
Yes. Well, so where are you heading?
Yeah.
I'm heading facing intact.
Yeah.
Yes.
I just wonder if undergraduate scene detection would itself be a starting point of a research tangent in terms of what are the how are consensus, just what are the criteria, what are the folk categories, because I know you want to do it as a means to get to something else, but I'm just wondering, is there any interest in just finding out what are some of the, folk categories, or the,
I mean, I can tell you what we use those categories for. Basically we didn't even have to tell the students that these were scenes. I said, divide this into events. When something different happens, just, write down the frame number. And they were going through it. It was in QuickTime, so they're essentially going through it in kind of real time. They come to a place where they, think something has happened, scroll back and forth, whatever, give me the frame number for when there's a change. Okay, so let's call there's a scene. I don't know, there's a change. It's almost always a change in location or a change in time or a change in characters. I mean, that's basically what scene means in theater. And so what are the characteristics, for example, of the shots just before and just after? Well, as it turns out, the shot just before a scene break tends to be longer than the average shot. The shot just after a scene break tends to be longer than the average shot. And I don't think this would surprise any of you. You go to a new location, you've got to establish that new location. It takes longer to do so. What's happening in the last shot is not clear to me. Is it a kind of dangling cause or something like that that's going to be picked up later? I don't understand. The most powerful correlate of of what the undergraduate marking is shot scale. Typically, the most common change in shot scale is to go from something like a medium shot or a medium close-up, it's probably a dialogue or something like that, and then you go back to a long shot. However, I mean, you can see in Scorsese's films or other kinds of things just the reverse. You might actually end with a long shot. You're going to have a change in tone of what's going on, and then you start with an extreme close-up. So I think what's important is the contrast in the shot scale that is giving you a new location. It should not surprise you at all that luminance, brightness, matters. You go from daytime to nighttime, that's obvious, or the reverse, but different scenes have a different sort of luminance feel to them. And that turns out to be a reasonably important correlate of what students who've done this tell you. A lot of people, I think I've talked this with almost all of you here, but color is modestly important, but as it turns out, it seems to signify changes in time more than anything else. It's often used in flashbacks. The two that I've talked about among you is in Ordinary People, there's a flashback to a traumatic incident that's blue. It's nighttime. And in Inception, all the flashes back and forth to all the different levels of the dream states. Those dream states are different colors. There's a gray of the urban environment. There's a warm brown of the interior of the hotel. There's a whiteness in the winter scene, and there's another kind of grayish, but mostly brown in Limbo. And so the colors tell you sort of what's going on. Also, if you code the characters that are involved in those particular situations, I mean, Nolan has a particularly difficult situation when he's jumping back and forth between all of these. So how does he tell you that he's going to a different level? Essentially, what he does is give you a medium shot or a medium close-up of a particular character, often maybe asleep or something else, and then the next shot is of the same character with a different background at a different level. So he's telling you basically, okay, we've switched in this case. So color is used in that case, and modestly important. Music, I don't need to tell anybody that music is going to be important in this. As it turns out, the problem with music, at least in our sample, is that action films have 75% of the shots covered with music. And it's usually the same theme, and it goes on and on and on and on. So Inception is particularly the same damn theme going on and on and on and on. So, and you know that there's a sound engineer just going like this with the same continuous music and turning it up and down and up and down. So if you have 75% of the shots covered with music, that's not going to be a strong cue for what's going on, because it's almost always there. Our comedies are covered with music background 50% of the shots. So here, you begin to get some particular kind of information that might be useful. And the typical pattern is that the music ramps down during the last shot of a scene, or it laps over into the first shot of the subsequent scene, and occasionally it's right at the scene boundary. And then dramas. Dramas are covered with, in our sample, are covered with music 25% of the time. So here, here you get a chance to, I think, really use music as a cue, and indeed it does turn out to be something dramatically important, and it often coincides with a prediction of a scene change or a post-diction of a scene change. So I wanted to find this, I'm going on much too long, but I wanted to find out if there were physical correlates in the film, like shot duration, like shot scale, like all the things that you can measure, that would be predictors of what the, indeed, undergraduates thought were these changes. I mean, I think we all believe that film is structured. We all know that it can be structured in lots of different ways. We all know that filmmakers will use this information to structure the narrative. So how well do these things work? And what's interesting, so you can do this statistically. So I have 5 or 6, 7 variables predicting the scene changes in that. And which ones work? Well, how much of the variance do they account for? About a third. I mean, so that means that the students are working, the students agree with one another. It's not like students are not agreeing. I mean, they agree with one another 91% of the time. It's astonishing how good they are. I mean, they have trouble with inception because things bounce back and forth, but in most more linear kinds of films or ones that have parallel action, they're pretty good at. And that's, I think, interesting. What matters for students are just 3 variables: change of location, change of characters, change of time. And sometimes that's hard to judge. It takes you a while to get into that. But that's the structure, that's how undergraduates divide things. They think something new has happened if any of those things happen. Filmmakers design their films to talk about shot durations and shot scales and all these other, they're using everything, but it's the characters and the locations and the time that govern everything. At this segmentation, only at scenes. Beyond, there are a lot of structures in movies beyond scenes, and we haven't touched those, but at least at the level of scenes.
There's one particular point. I have to reiterate that filmmakers, a film script has scenes. It said this scene 1, scene 2, and so on. And when the film is produced, in the production, the scene breakdown is used because there has to be a different set, perhaps for the next scene, and that has to be built and everything. So there's, it's pretty definite. Now, as James said, filmmakers are very concerned in general, except the makers of Boyhood, to establish the transition, particularly if they're using jump cuts. I mean, once upon a time there was no problem whatsoever about where the scenes ended, because they always ended with a dissolve or a fade out and a fade in. And that's no longer the case. And this, it is really, I've got to tell you, particularly dealing with student film, that it is a problem to prod them, to try and get them to, because our students have to jump cut. Actually, and we don't let them use dissolve. And prepare the transition, and this is my concrete point. I think you said you don't know why the last shot is long. Well, of course, this is because presumably the audience perceives it as being longer. It's the preparation. Something's going to change. Just as the first, more obviously, as you said, the first shot is longer to enable the member of the audience to locate where they've gone to, and hence deduce that it was a time transition, because ignoring cross-cutting between parallel actions, there is always a time transition from one scene to another scene, a time jump. There's always a time jump. Apart from the example, think about it.
I have.
And you think I'm wrong.
I think
it's indeterminate, and I think when you jump from in parallel action from one place to another.
I'm excluding that.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. No, I then.
Right.
Now, there is an old formalist tool, concept of the dominant that sometimes helps us explain why things change and how the things changed. The dominant across a film, a novel, has to change. And then Roman Jakobson actually said that every ending typically is signaled, and needs to be signaled that the thing will end soon by the change of dominant. So that's the ending. That could be one of the explanations why if films, particularly with Griffith, will become faster, climax, they never end there. Even Vertov in yesterday's presentation, in his super fast ending, lets the last shot be longer. This could be a psychological thing, but this could be also the change of dominant to signal the user, the viewer, that the ending is coming. As they do, I always ask myself, particularly driving a car, listening to the BBC, and some of the BBC radio station do announce their time. It's not alarm clock, but the kind of what time it is, by beep, 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 beep. I'm intoning it, they don't. But the last P is longer, saying that this is the last P. Sorry for the unintentional pun. Okay. You want to talk?
No, Jordan wants that. Was just
Jordan wants, okay.
Oh, I was just going to make a quick comment. I thought it was really interesting talking about it being a folk idea of what a scene is. I just think the difference between saying, well, yeah, there's a scene on a page or there's a production schedule scene, but from a psychologist's viewpoint, I mean, the most important thing is what your audience is perceiving as being these boundaries, and I think it's saying that they're just kind of folk theories of this. I mean, this is the actual experience of the people that are, perceiving the events. So I think that's a valuable. Maybe it's a different word for a production scene versus a perceived scene or something. But I thought that was an interesting dichotomy.
Yes, I agree that it's we can look at different perspectives. I just want to say there is a tradition, a critical tradition too, of segmentation, and it's been discussed, and I always come back to this. For me, I like to insist with my students on the arbitrariness of segmentation, and Caitlin knows this and disagrees with me, but Roland Barthes says said that he thinks of the segmentation as a grid that you put over the sky to observe the flight path of birds. So for the analyst, you sometimes you want to have, you can put different kinds of grids on, and basically I think for most Hollywood movies, character, time, location works perfectly well, but there are movies where it's a little bit weird.
Yeah.
Thinking about the opening of The Big Sleep, which is continuous in time as Marlowe moves through different rooms and meets different characters in what seem like different scenes. So it's not just there it's location and character, but not time. So that's interesting.
So let me start by saying I completely agree. So the assumption of a psychologist would be it's clear blue sky. And then you start asking people. And if they agree, you sort of say, isn't that marvelous? And how weird? Why do they agree? And so why don't we provisionally just decide that the places that they agree on are, and you have to watch out that it's not a leading question. That is, a lot of things there are wonderful demonstrations in Gestalt psychology, not unlike what Jordan showed with the Kanitsa triangle. You will see this lighter on this side than on that side, and of course you sit there. And, that's a leading question. You may have done that, but you have to watch out for that. But it's where the people agree that you kind of say, wow, what's going on there? And so I don't think we differ from in the starting point of this at all. And there was something else.
Yep. And this is the kind of things that moving across borders is good for, because for movie compression, we want to look. If it's a blue sky, it's just one bit, right? And
Right.
And
the MPEG is really small.
yeah. But we want to make it smaller and smaller and smaller without loss of narrative.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess I just want to add something to what Barry said about the scenes also having like a specific production presence as being an artifact that way, in terms of they're there at the writing level, at the pre-production planning level. They're also definitely there at the editing level. If you're cutting narrative, this is one of the basic ways you organize your work. You organize your footage typically by scene, and you work through them by scene and groups of scenes. And you're very much thinking about, I mean, for me, there's like three major levels of ways I'm thinking when I'm cutting. One is on the micro level, and like I think of it as cutting mechanics, how I think my cuts work. Next level is how I structure my scenes. Next level is how I structure my scenes in relation to each other, which gets into larger kind of a thing. But certainly then I'm very aware of all those kinds of things you talk about in terms of creating contrast, and that's something I try to encourage students to do, to think about when you move from one scene to another, how to create contrast. And sometimes, for example, in the footage for the film that we happen to use for my class, we have footage from an old indie film that we cut. There are some scene transitions that are very difficult because they don't have full coverage, and you might have like a wide shot or two shots on either side of the scene transition with the same shot scale, same character, and I'm like, yeah, that's a problem. How are you going to solve that? That kind of thing.
You can't solve it sometimes.
No, you can't. No, sometimes the footage wins. Yeah. One thing I would add to your list of categories, like a slight distinction, in addition to music, we also sometimes vary the sound environment, which might be less overt, and if it's covered by music, you're not finding it, but it's another way to create contrast, going from a quiet to a loud sound environment or something like that. And then you're also thinking about how do you foreground or establish that sound environment? Like how soon do you set up, say, traffic sound or something like that? So if there's a sequence in Inside Llewyn Davis where Llewyn Davis wakes up in an apartment and it's like someone else's apartment, and it's actually a series of scenes that have little time jumps that aren't necessarily immediately evident, but if you listen to how they're working with the traffic ambience, because it's set in New York City in the 60s, they shift over the course of the day because he wakes up in the morning and he's kind of there for the whole morning, and like the level of traffic, where they place in car horn honks outside, things like that are going to be definitely keyed into, when you start scenes, or maybe delay them toward the end of a scene or something like that. So.
I have a comment that I maybe want to address as a question to Yuri, and that's, I was thinking about James's point that when you're thinking about paintings and art history, you sort of can't get these art historians to jump into the mix. But then in the cinema, this has happened. It's not everybody, but it's not a minor group of people either. And so I'm wondering, if you think about, it seems that in the cinema, thinking about the cinema in statistical terms or sort of using numbers to describe the cinema has some relationship to one's aesthetic judgment of particular films in a way that's different. So I guess I sort of want to put this to Yuri and ask, what is it about the cinema or film history that seems to, just as an object, generate these different kinds of sort of multidisciplinary sort of different sorts of questions than other aesthetic objects?
To respond, I think that's one thing that does make movies more tempting to those who like count measuring, is that it's a time series art and it's visual as well. So yes, it includes the painting, which aspect ratio can worry you. You can choose. It changes our perception when we go to the cinemascope and back. That's one thing. Like music or dance, it's countable, and like literature, it's countable because it unfolds in space. So there are a lot of things to count. I'm not sure art historians are so well equipped. They're clearly equipped with the ancient idea of the golden section. And then one would go and take the preferences. I remember one psychologist did it, I read, but I forgot who it was. It may have been you. That actually, a psychologist actually collected data from a group of people, what kind of rectangle they prefer. And predictably, their choice was the golden section, the majority, the golden section. Then he went to the library. Yes, in a second, I'll just finish the story, but because of course you probably know the story better. Then he went to the museum and he saw that artists actually avoid the golden section. They want the frame to work differently. One second, Berg. But art historians, as I understand, love X-raying. We cannot. We don't have this option, unfortunately, perhaps with films. But X-raying a painting makes sense, so they do with numbers.
Just to say that, let's suppose the golden section was 1.37. It's not, but let's suppose it was. So if you look at the data, and the mean is right on 1.37, plus or minus 1.37. Huge variance. So much variance you can't possibly believe that the golden section is relevant.
The experimental studies on paintings, the proportion of paintings come out a bit off, and I don't know the data from what people prefer, but I wouldn't be surprised if that came off the gold. But you maybe know. It's just
So I want to be a bit more concrete, maybe, in what I say here. First of all, I want to offer my help in whatever you need for, I don't know, cleaning your database, introducing new fields. I think it's not a big... my time is a bit limited at the moment, but I think I can make time because I like doing that. I think it's not a big deal really if you give me the, I don't know, I assume it's an Excel file.
Correct.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot you can do automatic. So I would, yeah, it was actually my idea to suggest that. Then I would like to go back to what Ben said about what do we do with the data. Because in the digital humanities discussions, it's a question that is raised like all the time, and mostly what will the humanities do in this process? And I think it's a very fair question. I think it's the humanities don't take their place enough, and I also think it's an interdisciplinary undertaking. I think you need other people to help you with different things to work with the data. And if I could, because ever since I talked about this project that ended in 2010, and ever since I've been thinking, because there was this pile of data, and we didn't do anything with this in the end. And I thought it was very sad, mostly also because we just didn't know what to do, and because we didn't have any questions, frankly, right? We produced this data, The technicians used it. They wrote their papers. They were halfway happy because it was also not easy for them to find a slot, where to publish it. So ever since I've been thinking about putting a proposal for another project, and maybe now I will hopefully do that, and let's see. But thinking about who I would need with me on board, you realize very quickly that you need other disciplines with it. And for example, I would turn to the quantitative linguists. I think this is a very useful group of people because they can tell you a lot about statistics. They can also kind of help you a little bit in the questions how you breach the arts and how you can maybe find trends in it that they don't come just from the production side, but maybe from a more, I don't know, I don't want to say intuitive, but along these lines, you get my point. And this is also why I would include the editors. And I was very happy here at this conference that we had editors so prominent, so that we listen to what they say and we get a bit more into what they do all the time. And I would totally agree with James in terms of automated analysis. I think I told a couple of people here, because ever since the project ended, I've been talking to the informatics people, and I always ask them the same questions. I said, where is this program where I can just run my film through and then it gives me the shots neatly in the frames, start and ending? And usually they say, oh, that's easy. Then you show them the file and they say, well, no, it's not, no, it doesn't work. Or they say, well, it's easy, just use this program here, all you need is a few command lines. We don't have a graphical user interface. And I was like, all right, then forget it, I don't have time for that. So either you have an informatics guy sitting next to you and he will just be looking sadly at the results that you produce together, or you just can't get started. So this is why I want to conclude my long speech now with a very positive remark on Cinemetrics, because first of all, I think it's a hub. It brings people together. It's not just the data, it's also the articles you can find there. What I would love to see is a list of the projects people work on, so maybe that you see if other people are interested in the same stuff, and you can really connect with people. And the other thing is that it's not just the hard data you get, but what I loved about it is that you're awarded with a graph. You see a graph of your data, and this, for me, sometimes it's more valuable than to get the data out, which I can play around then later or not.
Griffith had this golden rule, wherever you're not sure whether to cut or not, it's time to cut. So probably this is time to cut this wonderful conference, and this was the last shot. This was the last shot, which is a longer and a happy ending and a more positive for the future one could imagine in Spector. I thanked everyone, Neubauer, Frank Institute. I never had a chance to thank you for coming, for giving. This is a wonderful conference. I mean, invariably useful as opposed to other conferences were variably useful. So, and thank you for being that. Thank you, Ben, for your objections. Thank you, Barry, for yours, and thank you for your results, which surprised everyone. You're such a jump ahead in your agenda explorations. Thank you, Charles.
Thank you for having us.